we can just get started on that if you would like. We have Raquel here, who is a member of our School of Biomedical Engineering, staff member. Thank you so much. She will be moderating this panel, and we will sign off and let you guys do your thing.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, I want to thank Laia and Nadine for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to be moderating the biotech industry panel. So my name is Raquel. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the partnerships manager for the School of Biomedical Engineering. I did my undergrad and PhD both at the University of Toronto. My undergrad was in genetics and biotechnology, and my PhD was in pharmaceutical sciences. And since graduating, I've been in various different roles in the interface between academia and industry. So we'll have our panel discussion today, and then you, the audience, will have a chance to ask your own questions. So without further ado, let's dive in. So firstly, Laia and Nadine, did the panelists have a chance to have their presentations yet or not yet?
Not yet. They will each give a short presentation just about who they are, what they do, and then we will open it up into Q&A.
Sounds great. So Daryl, if you'd like to take maybe 5 minutes to introduce yourself and what you do in your organization, and then we can go through the other panelists.
Fantastic, thanks. I don't know why I've got Dawn Knight in front of my name, but there we go. So my name's Daryl. I've been in this role for about a year. I'm new, so I'm fairly new to the role, but I'm not new to Vancouver. I did my postdoctoral training here, and I came back in 2004 as a Canada Research Chair and stayed until December 2012. And both of those times I sort of travelled back and forward between Australia and Vancouver. So I'm delighted to be back in Vancouver. I love the city. A big reason for coming back was the development of this new hospital and the opportunity to participate in its build and also the research building. So I think most of you who are on the line from Vancouver may know St. Paul's. It's 125 years old, a venerable old building, but it's falling down amongst us at the moment. So we can't move quick enough. And so really the opportunity to try and build the research capacity to service the clinical work, but serve as a nexus for industry, academic, community, and clinical problems, and be that solver of those problems, I think for me is an enormous opportunity. Just very quickly, I'm a pharmacologist by trade, but I turned into a cell biologist and then turned into more of an administrator as my career developed. And I'm really, really excited to be back here. Very happy to talk to this great cadre of students, and if I can answer any questions, I'm happy to.
Great, thanks a lot, Daryl. So next we have Iria Donahue from CCRM.
Great, thanks, Raquel. Yeah, so I'm Iria Donahue, and I'm the IP specialist at CCRM. So as I kind of mentioned in the brief introduction, one of the key aims of CCRM is to generate new startup companies that have new technologies in the RM space. And so my role at CCRM is to assist in early diligence to identify potential opportunities, and then to build the collaborations with inventors at CCRM and with inventors at academic institutions to launch those companies from CCRM and from the academic networks. So I've been at CCRM for about 4 years now. I joined straight out of my PhD, so I did my PhD at the University of Toronto, as mentioned, the bio under Professor Scheuket at U of T. So I was focusing on protein delivery for the central nervous system. But really, since joining CCRM, I've been exposed to a wide range of opportunities across the RM space, and it's been very excited to be able to dive into different types of opportunities with many different disciplines. And I think that's about all I need to say at this time. So happy to discuss in the panel and look forward to the questions from the audience.
Great, thanks, Iria, for being here today. So we also have Dr. Eric Jarvis from Stem Cell Technologies.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Jarvis. I currently work at Stem Cell Technologies in Vancouver. I head up the bioengineering program there. It's a group of about 15 researchers currently in my group. And we work on everything bioengineering across the company. So we get involved in cell separation products and projects. We get involved in media development projects. My group is specifically in charge of scale up. So we're working a lot on 3D scale up for growing PSCs and differentiated tissues. Very exciting work. Stem Cell has more than 1,500 employees. Right now, we're not hiring too much, but we're growing like crazy. And I would encourage everyone to follow our site if you're looking for work. A little bit about myself. So I did all my degrees at UBC. I did an undergrad, a master's and a PhD. I finished my PhD at UBC in '98. And then I went to the University of Waterloo, a great undergraduate institution, for 17 years, where I headed up a group that was doing imaging and trying to understand how cells interact from a reaction diffusion sort of standpoint. But after 17 years at Waterloo, the head of the company, Alan Eves and Terry Thomas, who was then VP Research, asked me if I was interested in not teaching anymore. And it turned out I was. So now I run a very large research group. I do exactly what I did as a professor, except now I don't have to teach, which is amazing. And interestingly, my group really, because Stem Cell is the largest biotech company in Canada now, my group at Stem Cell is amazing. I have 15 extremely talented people working for me, and I'm always looking for more people. Typically from the undergrad realm, we hire from co-ops. And so co-op is very important, although we've suspended our co-op program right now. But in the before time, we had probably 4 or 5 co-ops in my group every term. And then if you had an outstanding performance in your co-op term, we would then offer you a job. Anyway, I'm very happy to answer any questions. And if you have a serious question and you don't get a chance to ask it, send me an email. I will respond to all serious questions.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. And we also have Jeff Alkinlett from Claris Healthcare.
Yes, good morning and good afternoon. Claris Healthcare is a company that actually feeding on what Dr. Daryl Knight said. We provide a platform for delivery of care into the home. And this is being driven by a very large trend in healthcare that we are now dealing with an aging population which tends to have chronic rather than acute conditions, which means that it doesn't make sense to try to put somebody in a hospital bed and cure them because their condition's never going to go away. So as a result, much of what is currently delivered in institutional settings is going to be moving into the home, and we intend to provide the technology platform to make that happen. We've been talking about this for 8 years since the company was founded in 2012, but something happened this March which suddenly accelerated this at blinding speed. And as a result, our company has been experiencing significant growth and a massive uptake on our remote patient monitoring and social isolation applications for our products. So it's a really exciting time. I guess I'm one of the companies that's benefiting from the COVID epidemic rather than being crushed by it. So it's a nice position to be in. Personally, I graduated from UBC in engineering physics and electrical option back in 1981 and spotted an ad in the Vancouver Sun that was said they were looking for somebody with a PhD in clinical or biomedical engineering. So of course I applied. I had no idea what clinical or biomedical engineering was because back then there was no such program at UBC. I didn't have the benefit of learning anything about that. Although I was completely unqualified, I did get the job. By the way, I've kept that pattern through the rest of my career. I've never had a job for which I was qualified, so that's fair enough. Worked in the hospital setting for a few years before the founder of the biomedical engineering department at VGH told me that rather than going back and doing my PhD, which I had always intended to do in something in applied physics, that he had just funded a project to build a robot to assist in surgery and would I be interested in working on that. So feeling my arm rather firmly pulled up my back, I started a team that built the first robot ever specifically designed to assist in surgery in 1984. It was voice controlled. We used it in 250 odd surgical procedures at UBC Hospital. and it was about 25 years ahead of his time. So not very practical. Wasn't really that great, but it was interesting to be part of that team. From there, I went off into a whole range of other different surgical and medical technologies. Ended up in lab automation, doing blood handling systems. And then 1997 kicked off my own company for the first time. Instead of working for other people, I thought I was smart and had lots of good ideas. Turned out I wasn't. But fortunately, I was saved by some customers who told me what they really wanted. And that was a thing for managing blood for transfusion in acute care hospitals. That system is now in use all over the world. I'm proud to say that every single blood transfusion in Ireland is tracked from the donor's vein to the patient's vein entirely through our system to this day. We've ended up revolutionizing the way blood is managed in hospitals. I sold that company in 2009, attempted retirement. Turned out I wasn't very good at that job and I got fired. Fired by a former employee of mine who decided that I should start a new company so that he would have a job. So we co-founded Claris in 2012, and the rest, as they say, is history. We've developed this platform for care delivery. So there you are. That's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jeff. Interesting career path. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And thank you all for introducing yourselves. And what a great panel we have here today. Thank you for your time. And I think we'll all learn a lot from the discussion. So I have some prepared questions for you all, but I'm also seeing some great questions pop into the Q&A box here. So we'll go back and forth between the prepared questions and questions from the audience. So let's dive right in. So first, let's cover the biotech and biomedical industry. So the first question is, what, in your opinion, differentiates the biomedical industry from other industries? What's unique about it? We'll start with Daryl.
Yeah, when I was thinking about these questions, I think the first thing that came into my head was the direct benefit or direct activity with patients. For me, that's the reason why I got into medical research in the first place. And I think the biomedical industry needs patients. Patients need the biomedical industry. And I think we really need to start focusing on complex patients, because most patients don't just have one little thing that's wrong with them. So I think actively understanding the patient needs is where the biomedical industry needs to go.
Great. Anyone else would like to tackle this one?
I'll give a quick answer to that. I think the thing in my mind now that really distinguishes it, as Daryl said, is complexity. You know, working with living systems at a health level is vastly more complex than anything biochemical engineering used to do, right? We were growing cells in a vat to make insulin. That was trivial. Now, all of a sudden, I'm trying to understand how stem cells interact in a little ball to make a piece of cardiomyocyte so that I can put that into a patient. And that is complex. And so I think there is a new understanding of the complexity of the systems that we're trying to work in, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make people healthy, and that is very difficult to define.
Right, so there is that interdisciplinarity that you all seem to be drawn to, yeah. Okay, and so
sorry, Raquel. I just wanted. I think what Eric says is absolutely spot on. And what I would anticipate though is that we really need to do a better job as a community of engaging with patients, because if we don't have patients as our advocates, and if we don't have patients as our friends, then we're stuck with models that don't always be the best things to do. So I really would just put a call out that we need patients and their support staff to be our friends and our advocates and our partners.
So Daryl, what are some of the challenges in engaging patients in this work for the industry as a whole?
Yeah, you see, that's a really interesting question, and I don't want to monopolize the time, but this is about a 4-hour answer. In Australia, where it came from, it's a very different, at least on the surface, a different environment with patients. And the diseases that I study, one of them being pulmonary fibrosis, is uniformly lethal within 5 years of diagnosis unless you have a lung transplant. Every patient with IPF I've ever dealt with has said, take my lungs and cure this swear word laden disease. In Vancouver, at least, it's a little bit more of a intricate web to try and get access to patients in the first place. So I think that's the first place we need to get our governments and our regulators to get on board and make it, with security and privacy, all those things, but make it an accessible opportunity. So a case in point, there was 53 lung transplants done in Canada, in Vancouver last year. 52 of them were not used for research, which is just a travesty. So, and I guarantee you every patient would have said, yes, take my lungs and use them. So we've got to be able to fix that, and that's where the regulators come on board. I think that's the biggest and main hurdle that I see, at least in British Columbia.
Great. Okay. Anyone else have a perspective on that they would like to share? Go ahead, Eric.
Daryl, I'll comment on that because we're in the business of just helping to sell and distribute primary tissues. And in Canada, it's very difficult. So right now we're working in the pulmonary space and doing various types of non-invasive sampling to try to get them to our customers, because access to primary tissue for experimentation and drug discovery and high throughput screening is a major bottleneck. And so we have to work in the US to do this right now.
Yeah, which is again, that becomes the taker rather than the maker type philosophy. And we see that all the time in Canada, that we give things away or we get them done elsewhere because we don't have the regulatory support to be able to do it in Canada. And I think that's the groundswell that I'm seeing.
You know, for the biomedical engineers on the call, if you have access to lungs like that, then we have processes to break the lungs apart and do the cell fractionation and do the cryopreservation and the distribution, real biomedical engineering downstream of tissue availability. And, you know, most of our primary cells are sold at cost, basically, so that the research community can benefit from that, because there's nothing quite like the real cell. Stem cells, when they differentiate, are close, but most people want the real deal. And so access to primary tissue is fundamental. And there's a ton of biomedical engineering to do in helping to distribute these primary samples. So give me a lung and I'll break it into 1,000 vials and distribute them.
There you go. Thanks so much, Eric.
If I can jump in there, just getting back to the original question, a couple of comments, and again, follow up on Dr. Knight's comments. Accessibility is absolutely key as we roll technologies out into the community and out to patients. If you do not get engagement with medical technologies, particularly home-based technologies, you have nothing. And you know, I've seen absolute disasters with digital-based technologies, which start with the assumption that, well, just, you know, download an app on your smartphone and Bluetooth connect to this, that, and the other thing. Try handing that to an 85-year-old who's, you know, never used a smartphone before, and you immediately throw up barriers that make it impossible to get these things used. That is going to be a growing challenge with an aging population. Even those that are growing up as digital natives get less and less patient with the constant change and, you know, constant updates and everything else. So one of my pleas for biomedical engineers is to take a really hard look at usability aspects and accessibility aspects of their technologies. Related to that, you know, something that is fundamentally different about being a biomedical engineer versus, you know, electrical or eng phys or something else, is that what you're doing has critical importance in terms of hazard and safeties, hazard analysis and safety. You know, if you make a mistake in a flight simulator game and somebody's, you know, fake plane flies into a cliff, no one's going to get hurt and no one's going to be too upset. But you just can't take that approach when it comes to biomedical engineering. Safety is paramount. Hazard analysis is paramount. Understanding what you're doing and the impact it has on real people's lives is really the important thing. But it's also the benefit. You know, I have a short anecdote. I hired a software engineer once who came to me from Electronic Arts, where he was a video game designer. And he came to this little company I was starting up, and I said, "Are you out of your minds? I mean, you know, designing video games, it's got to be like this most sweetheart thing you can do as a software developer." And he said, "Well, let me put it this way. At Electronic Arts, I could maybe, you know, develop a more realistic looking blood splatter in some shoot 'em up game. And in your company, I could save somebody's life." That's the point. You could also harm them, but you could save somebody's life. The red letter days in my life have been the times when I've had a call from a customer who says, just thought you might want to know that your software prevented a missed transfusion that would have killed a patient today. That's what makes it worthwhile. Biomedical engineering is about doing well by doing good. Remember that.
Can I just also say, building on that, Jeff, it's also about not just relying on speed. So case in point, artificial intelligence has been proven to be better, if not as good, if not better than clinicians in understanding x-rays and being able to diagnose chest diseases or any other disease. It's also got really good at predicting patients who are going to develop a heart attack in 5 years' time. It's amazing at how fast it is. But that sort of information alone is not going to give us any better understanding of the disease. And that's why we need the patient material and as much of it as we can get to understand the pathophysiological mechanisms. And so trying to understand the multi-omic analyses with imaging, with your blood pressure analysis, with all those sort of pathophysiological things, that's where we can coalesce around making a smarter drug or a smarter therapy or a smarter treatment. You need the whole picture. You don't, a biopsy is the size of a grain of rice, and that's really useful for a diagnosis, but it's got limited utility in developing an understanding of the pathophysiology of the disease. So we need that component, but this drive to make things quicker is great, but we've still got to step back and say, we need to understand more. And that's where this multi-analysis sort of digital infrastructure is going to be massively important in the next 5 to 10 years.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much, Daryl and Jeff, for those perspectives. So I'm seeing really great questions pop into the Q&A box. So let's tackle some of them. So this one, it was from an anonymous attendee, and it was mentioned that there has been a really rapid growth in the biotech industry in recent years. How do you see the industry evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And what skills do you think graduates will need once they enter the industry?
Sure, I can throw in. So I gave a couple of examples there in data science and data analysis, artificial intelligence, robotics. For those of you who are interested, there is a platform called the Ward of the 21st Century at the University of Calgary and Foothills Hospital, and it's basically a beta testing hospital ward where a lot of innovations in clinical mechanics, if you will, are utilized. So bariatric beds, for example, a lot of things are trialed there, and they're trialed with the patients there. And I think this is where I'm seeing a massive shift in embedding biomedical engineering actually in the hospital. We've got Providence Health is developing a dementia village on Vancouver Island, which will be the most amazing living lab experience. And so we'll be embedding biomedical engineering type applications in that dementia village. They'll also be rolled out to long-term care facilities. So better designed beds, better designed furniture to prevent or at least minimize falls. Those sort of innovations are going to be developing at a rate of not simply because we've got an aging population. As Jeff also alluded to, keeping people at home rather than getting them into hospital. So things that are going to be involved in those apps are obviously the way to go. But biomedical engineering is such a broad brush. You can pick anything from designing a bariatric bed through to artificial intelligence, and there will be jobs everywhere for them.
Great, thanks, Daryl. Encouraging perspective. Iria, I'd love to hear from you. Your role is very much embedded in innovation, so would love your perspective here.
Sure. I mean, I definitely agree with Daryl in terms of digital health innovations and accessibility. And I think speaking from more of the RM perspective, these advanced therapeutic products are something that we see as growing and evolving in the industry. And it's interesting to think about the intersections of something like a cell gene therapy product with a digital product or an AI-driven innovation as well. But to speak more broadly, I think that just speaks to the need for skills to be able to translate ideas across disciplines, across subdisciplines in biomedical engineering, the ability to kind of jump in and learn, immerse yourself in a new field and to make connections across fields to better understand and to better solve problems in any role that you have. So, if you just take a step back to look at what kind of skills a graduate needs to have, it's something around, I would say, that ability to make connections, flexible thinking, and adapt and quickly learn to take up new technologies. We hire people with many different backgrounds. As Dr. Jarvis mentioned, people coming from a biochemical, bioprocessing perspective are now starting to apply those technologies where the cell is the product of the cell is no longer the product. So how can you translate the expertise in those disciplines to these new forefront fields that are emerging?
Wonderful, thanks, Iria. Okay, actually, there is a very interesting question for you. So why don't we tackle that one next? What do you look for as signs of promising technologies and viable teams at CCRM?
Right, yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a number of different factors that we assess. I mean, one is definitely the unmet need. So, does this solve a problem that is out there, and how does it solve that problem? What is the potential to have a real impact on patients? The second is, where are they going with the technology? What have they shown to date? Do they have a track record to stand by? Do they have some signs that you can say, okay, this is a promising, this is less risky, more risky. How can we understand that? And then we look to build that relationship and see where things can go and how we can support. So, there's many different avenues that you can use for assessment, and definitely check out our website and some of our case studies to see how we've applied that in a specific situation. But that's where I would start.
Great, thanks, Iria. And I see an interesting question for Daryl. What kind of support or opportunities does Providence offer students who are participating in research that is related to healthcare? So we talked a lot about that, the importance of interfacing with patients. So how can students that are pursuing research go about accessing those opportunities?
Yeah, depending on what level of education they're at, if they're undergraduate or postgraduate, second, third year, fourth year, etc. I mean, a co-op position is the easiest way to get a feel for whether it's the right thing for you. I had a co-op student when I was here on my last trip who did a co-op in a cancer lab, in a salmon fishery and a forestry thing, and then came to my lab. And the breadth of experience you can get from doing co-ops is amazing. And then she ended up doing a PhD with me. That would be the easiest place to start. Then once those sort of things have developed and you find an affiliation or an affection for what you want to do, then you talk to potential supervisors. There's a number of ways to get into doing research. It depends on what you really want to do with that research. And if you're at excuse me, at the postgraduate level, then there's MITAX fellowships. There's there's Michael Smith Foundation. There's a number of support mechanisms, but the key for you, whoever asked that question, and other students, is to understand what you want to at least have a look at and try, and then go and speak to the relevant person. I can put you in contact with people in the hospital. Providence Research Institute is actually it's an umbrella organisation. There's a number of research centres and research groups embedded within the hospital that fall underneath the purview of the institute. So please feel free to reach out to me, and I can be really happy to have a chat to you and point you in the right direction.
Wonderful. Thanks, Daryl, for the support. I see an interesting question here that would be great for Eric and Jeff to address. So how much of your day-to-day work involves collaborating with academia?
I'll go first. A ton. So I run grant applications. I do grant sponsorships, probably half a dozen a year. I have my techs, people in my group. I have the odd PhD project in my group. I run fourth-year projects all the time as well. So stem cell is very involved in all of this type of work. So I work a lot with academia on many projects because really the academics show proof of principle, then I have to turn it into a product. And that's a whole nother world, let me tell you. Jeff?
Yeah, I would say that if you looked at the history of all my different products that I've been involved with, there's a very simple correlation between products where I had a brilliant idea and where I dealt with academics and experts who were actually at the coalface dealing with real issues every day, and they came to me and said, if you could help me with this problem, I'd be really interested. And oddly enough, those products ended up being big successes. It's a really simple formula. And I broaden the academic, experience, not just to, professors in research labs, but mostly to clinical specialists who are working every day with patients in hospital settings, doing their research in the clinical delivery side. And it's a gold mine. If you are looking to be an entrepreneur, start up a biotech company, go talk to people who have the problems. They're more than happy to tell you, I need this, I need help with this. And that's where you can find your opportunities. And I'm sure, Eric, that's how you find your product opportunities, is people come to you and say, we need this, and there you go.
We have a very large group that scans the patent literature. We talk to all the TTLOs. Most of our products are from in-licensing of technologies developed with intellectual property protection at universities. IP protection, by the way, is very important. Hopefully you guys are learning something about that in your courses. If you have a great idea, filing a patent is actually very inexpensive. You have a year to flesh it out. I would highly recommend you all get some experience in intellectual property protection because it is key to our industry. Without some IP protection, I can't invest too heavily in it because someone else will reproduce it cheaper and take my margin, which is critical. Otherwise, we're not a company.
Arya, since you're a specialist in this area, I would love to hear from you some advice for students on, how they can learn a little bit more about IP protection beyond what they might learn about in their courses.
Yeah, I mean, seconding everything that Dr. Jarvis said there in terms of the importance of IP and interesting, how it can apply to this industry and where it's going here in Canada. But I think there's a lot of great resources actually online, but also reach out to your tech transfer office. So every institution will have a group that is responsible to help enable transfer of technologies out of university to develop them into commercial products. And they also begin with looking at whether your idea can be patented, how they can support you with that. So that's something that you should definitely reach out to as well to understand it better and to look at success stories in the industry and to see what's out there and where things are headed. Many professors have a lot of experience in terms of filing patents. Subset of those then have experience in generating new products and moving that forward beyond just the initial first patent filing. So it's an ongoing process that should look at, but you definitely don't want to miss your opportunity to protect something that could really help you protect the value and attract interest from partners that can then help you move things forward.
Great, thank you so much. So we touched on this a little bit, but I would love to hear from you all. What is one thing that you would change about working in the biotech industry? So not something that the biotech industry is deficient in, but what you would personally change about your working experience in the industry.
Well, I'll start off on that one. If there was one magic, wave of the wand I could do, it would be to change the attitude of Canadian, British Columbian institutions to locally developed technologies. It just astounds me that, we have fantastic world-leading technologies built in Vancouver that are sold in Vancouver as the last resort. They essentially have to be proved throughout the rest of the world before anyone will look at them here. I can give you chapter and verse, a litany of different products I'm aware of that have been hugely successful elsewhere in the world and very, very late to be adopted locally. Certainly, I've done as much as I can with various organizations over the years. I've been operating the not-for-profit Medical Device Development Center in Vancouver to help promote local medical device technologies. But it just does astound me that right across the water here in Victoria, we have Starfish Medical Engineering. You'll be hearing from one of their team members later today that does development for companies all over the world. It's a world-leading company, and yet much of what they develop is not in use locally. It just astounds me. So there's my rant for the day.
I would second, third, and fourth that.
That's a tough one.
Great. Any other ideas or insights?
What would I change? That's a really interesting and difficult question. In general, I'm pretty happy with the system. I think we should go more, we need to go slowly in some areas because there's a great potential for doing harm. Particularly in my area, the stem cells and whatnot is really tricky. I think if I could change one thing, it would be the balance of focus on high technology and appropriate technology. We could save way more lives by getting people to eat right and do a diet than we can with the most advanced AI robotic doing something or else. And this is always a consideration. We need to make sure that the health fundamentals are solid before we start curing people with stem cells for problems that they could have avoided by eating properly 10 years ago. And I think it's a very important balance, and biomedical engineers have a role here because healthy living requires an engineering approach to process development of your food and your exercise and all of these sorts of things. So I know it's not really engineering-y, but we need an appropriate balance because with a very small investment, we could probably lower our health costs in Canada quite a bit by getting people to exercise a little bit. That's my rant for the day.
Great, thanks, Eric. Aria?
In terms of where the field overall is headed, and I think this is true for a number of sectors in Canada, is really just, I'd like to see more diversity, especially at the senior leadership level. If you look at where graduate programs are going, they're becoming more diverse. But then, the pace of change at the leadership level is something that I'd like to see because you can get better results, you can have transformative outcomes if you have this diversity of perspectives and experience that are leading companies in Canada. And I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind.
I'll jump on that. Half of our VPs are women or people of various other ethnicities. I think that maybe 10 years ago that may have been an issue, but I think a lot of Canadian companies that I go to now are quite diverse and well aware of what you're talking about. So certainly the largest biotech company in Canada, I think the diversity is amazing.
That's right, yeah.
Great, thanks, Aria, for bringing up this really important point. So Shauna Lee had a very interesting question, thinking about students who are maybe approaching the end of their undergraduate studies and thinking about their next steps. In your opinion, in the biotech industry, what sorts of work opportunities does having a master's or PhD open up? So what sort of positions would master's or PhD students get that candidates with only a bachelor's might not be able to access? And thinking about whether it's worth to pursue graduate studies. So does it increase hireability, in your opinion?
I'll go on that one because I've been doing this for a long time. I'll start if you don't mind. A master's is great to give you research experience, to understand the research process, and it will bring you into our company at 2 higher levels. And so if you come in with a bachelor's, you're a research technician. If you come in with a master's, you're a research associate. If you come in with a PhD, you're a scientist. There are no glass ceilings. A bachelor's person can be a scientist, a senior scientist, principal scientist. However, it might take some time. I think that lots of people should do quick masters to get some exposure to research. In particular, if there's a project that is very interesting to you and you want to do a little bit of work, do a master's. My recommendation is only do a PhD if you can see it as a vocation, if it becomes your inner core, if it is what you want to be, then do a PhD, because it is really going to be a 4, 5, or 6 year adventure, and it will be what you're known for. So a master's, absolutely, it will help you in our company and do it as a career opportunity. PhD, only do it if you're okay to be to really take it all in. Okay, a PhD requires a certain amount of commitment, and if you're doing a superficial PhD, it's a total waste of time.
I'll jump in there because I'm probably a little bit more in that hybrid space of not being in biotech but working with biotech, and I may even do a disservice to the rest of the field. I still think we are training PhD students incorrectly. We've got the one size fits, was supposed to be fitting everybody. Now that one size doesn't fit many people at all. So there's a lot of people that do a PhD that are, trying to get positions in academia or other places that just don't exist, particularly in academia. And if they've only got that one sort of experience, which is, in my case, lab research, answering some questions and then producing a thesis, and what a lot of the academic institutions now are doing, which I think is really smart, particularly in that early stage of coursework, is introducing innovation, introducing entrepreneurship, introducing other things that students who want the experience but don't necessarily see themselves as an academic can still get. And I think that that's where I'd be looking to develop that. Along the lines of what Eric said, if you know that you want to become a cell biologist or a biomedical engineer that looks at the tension of collagen in a muscle or an organ, perfect. If you want to do a PhD but you're not sure, then try these different things. And I think this is where the North American style PhD is far better than the Australian and the old UK style, where it's very prescriptive. Try things that you when you can, co-op, masters, whatever it is, try them and see what you like to do. And if you've got a passion for something, follow it. But don't go into a PhD expecting you're going to come out of it with an academic position, for example. Go into it with an open mind.
Keyword passion. Exactly. That's a PhD.
Yeah, you're going to need that passion to get you through. I think, from our experience with our company, people are at all levels and people come to things with many different backgrounds, and it's about being open to new opportunities. Definitely agree with that, and seeing where your interests and your capabilities intersect and getting a better sense of what's out there in the diversity. And you can go back and forth. We've had people that joined us, interns, they left to do graduate degrees. They came back. There's movement across, and being able to get early experience outside of academia can be helpful if you need that perspective and some understanding of where to go.
I'll jump in and take it in a somewhat different direction. I think as a biomedical engineer, one of the things you need to decide is whether you're interested in working in a research company or a development company. And the distinction I make is a research company like Stem Cell is heavily, heavily research oriented because they're doing new science in order to develop their products. Whereas a lot of medical device companies and digital health companies, they're development companies. There's no new science to be invented. It's application of technology to solving well understood problems. Now, the well understood problems came out of the research labs, don't get me wrong, but it really is the application of technology rather than the development of new science. If that's the kind of work you want to do, a bachelor's is fine. I'm not looking for a master's degree in software development when I need a software developer. I'm looking for somebody who can code well. It's just technology application. So it really depends on the kind of company you're after and the kind of work you're interested in doing. if you're deeply into science, then, you know, master's and PhD route and looking for a research-oriented company is definitely the way to go. You know, very common in drug development, for example. If you're more interested in a development company and a technology development business, then the bachelor's degree is usually sufficient.
Great. Okay, and you know, thinking about student interns, right? So what do you look for in your organizations in interns, and what can students do to increase their ability to get internships? So this is specifically for those students pursuing their undergraduate studies.
Well, more than just coursework. You know, I think that's the key thing I look for, not just in students, but in any employee, is that if you just come to me and said, I did all my courses and I did well in them, I'm bored, to be perfectly honest. I want to know what else you've done, what your passions are, what do you do on the weekend? You know, how have you demonstrated through your activities that you have an interest in our field and that you have something original to contribute and you've spent some time and effort on it. That it's more than just, you know, yeah, I got, you know, first class honors in my math course. That's not enough. So I would take a B student who's, you know, done a heck of a lot of, you know, hands-on stuff over the weekends over an A student who's done nothing but coursework.
I'd add to that by saying curiosity, passion, and dedication. The degree itself is not irrelevant or superfluous, but if you've got a curiosity and it comes across, I'm far more likely to take a chance and say, well, let's have a look at this, rather than, if, as Jeff said, you said, look, I'm an A+ student and I just want to do this. Curiosity in research is the fundamental thing, along with passion. And if you can't demonstrate that, or you don't have that, then probably not much point in approaching any of us as potential supervisors.
I have some unpopular things to say, if you'd like. So look, at Stem Cell, we're a very big company and popular. So I will receive 25 co-op applications for a given opening from across Canada. The very first cut I have to do is looking at marks. Now, marks don't tell me how smart you are. Be very, very clear here. Marks don't tell me how smart you are. They tell me how fast you learn. Because, you know, anyone can do one engineering course, but now you got to do 5 of them. And to carry a first class average in 5 courses, you learn fast and you work hard. Now, typically I'm going to have, out of my 25 applicants, I'm going to have 5 of them that have 80 and above. Then I'll start looking at which specific courses they excelled in. I'm looking for, if you've got a straight 95, it's hard to tell anything, and I'll bring you in because you're probably very smart. But if you've got like 82s and then a 95 in a project course and then a 95 in some other course, I want you, because it means that you can keep her going, but when you're interested, you accelerate and you get involved in something, and I can see the difference. As I say, I'll have 3 or 4 co-ops every term come through. We only do 8-month co-op terms. And the reason that I'm interested in how fast you learn is because I have to get you in, train you in 2 weeks, and then have you do something that makes money for Stem Cell. Stem Cell is not a charity. So when you come in to work as a co-op student, I expect to have productivity towards product launching. And that means you have to get going very, very quickly. So marks will get you looked at, coursework and projects. So once I get, if I have 7 or 8 students with high marks, then I start looking at projects. I look at variation in the marks, and then I look for anything in that package that shows me innovation or creative thinking. And then I'll do interviews like crazy and have them be very open and weird and look for people that are creative and respond well to uncertainty.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. So what I'm hearing is marks will get you into the door so that you can advance to the interview stage, right? Yes. And then once you get to that point, you know, passion and curiosity will really make the candidate stand out. So I have a couple of follow-up questions. Is there a way to that candidates can show that passion and curiosity through their initial applications before getting into the interview stage. An interesting question from the audience is, what if your hobbies are not related to the job? How can you somehow play that to your advantage when applying to positions?
Well, as I'm the one who brought that up, in a sense, I'll say it doesn't necessarily matter if your hobbies are not related to the job. I mean, if you know, the job in our company may be developing software for effective delivery of healthcare into a patient's home. That's hard to do as a hobby. But if you come to me and demonstrate that you have taken on and completed some technology development for, I don't know, a new drone or something, it shows the ability to creatively approach a problem, solve it, and follow through to completion on a difficult challenge. You know, that kind of gets back a little bit to what Eric is saying, is that, you know, the ability side, the application of the intelligence is really what's after her. So don't be afraid to tell me about your bizarre hobby, which has nothing at all to do with the job. You know, you might find it fascinating. I mentioned that I got that first job at BGH as a biomedical engineer, despite having none of the requirements. The reason I got the job is the guy I was applying to had been the chairman of the engineering ball model competition at UBC and had taken first place, and I had too. And neither of us had anything to do with biomedical technology, but that's what we connected on, was doing this, you know, personally driven project that was challenging and difficult and came up with a good result. That got me the job. Nothing to do with biomedical engineering. So, case in point.
Area, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to jump in there. I think that even at the undergraduate level, engineering degrees offer a lot of opportunities for projects, for collaborative projects that become achievements, right? Either in your coursework, in many different types of clubs and activities, challenges that you can do. So, you know, to get specific, when you apply, you should have a cover letter that talks about what you've done and what's unique and what you've achieved. And that's going to get an attention from somebody reading it, rather than just a resume that lists the courses that you've taken. What did you actually do in those courses? What problems did you solve? Where are you going with things? Did you do undergraduate research? Did you do a lab course that has specific projects where you found something interesting, you did something new? You can kind of blend that technical competence with this innovation and creative thinking that applies to research and development, if that's the kind of roles that you're looking to achieve.
I think also building on that, I mean, just by the nature of the degree, biomedical engineering students would be curious anyway. And they'd also want to apply what they know and are learning to a medical field. For me, you know, what we're trying to achieve in this new medical precinct is not what we've already got. It's how can we make it better than the sum of its parts, to use a tired term. The way to do that is to be multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. And so, you know, we're talking about mixing clinicians with people from the Centre for Digital Media, for example, people who are using artificial intelligence, physicists, mathematicians, to answer questions that have plagued us for many, many years. So I think for me, it's understanding, you know, at their own level, why did they come into biomedical engineering, and what do they want to apply their knowledge for? And whether it's a mechanical device, whether it's computing, whether it's something else that's in biomedical engineering, how do we apply that to the question? And what's the question that they want to answer? And that's really where I'd be focusing a lot of my attention, is what do they really want to do, and what brought them to that field and the hospital in the first place.
Eric?
I just want to throw something out there in case students aren't aware of this. When I get a package of 20 applications, all of your CVs look identical. Someone at your schools is teaching you how to make a resume or a CV, and they're all identical. Don't do that. That's why I look at marks, because the CVs, resumes tell me nothing. If you have something interesting and different to put on there, put it on there and make sure I can see it. Put something in your cover letter that helps you stand out from the crowd. If your marks are sort of average-ish, and average is by definition average, then put something else in there, because your CVs, resumes tell me nothing anymore. You all did programming, you all did all of this stuff that you all did in your courses, and I have no idea if you actually did it or not. I have no idea if it's a meaningful understanding or not. You know, because you were exposed to SolidWorks for an hour does not mean you can do SolidWorks, but every CV will have SolidWorks on there. So CVs are becoming useless. So make sure you put something in there to make it stand out, because I don't even look at them right now. If they're coming from most major universities, it's pointless, which is why I go straight to the transcript.
Great, really great tips. Thank you so much, everyone. So I see an interesting question that would be great for Jeff. So Jeff, you talked about your career path and how, you know, you've tackled jobs that you weren't necessarily qualified for. So the question is, would you recommend applying for jobs that people are not qualified for, even if they're really interested in the position? Would you as an employer potentially hire someone who isn't entirely qualified for the position, and why?
Well, I will tell you that from my perspective, I am not going to find anybody who is perfectly qualified for jobs I'm posting. By definition, what we're doing has not been done before. If it had been done before, we wouldn't be in business. So, you know, it is quite frankly impossible for me to find somebody who is perfectly qualified for exactly what we are doing. So really what I'm looking for is somebody who shares the passion, understands, you know, the purpose, the why behind our company, and buys into that, has demonstrated that they're willing to really work hard to achieve the goals in this space, and has some demonstration of ability, as once again, as Eric said, to learn really fast, because we're going to throw you in the deep end of the pool and expect you to do something worthwhile and valuable in very short order. You know, so yeah, absolutely apply for jobs that you don't have any qualification for, because if you're applying for a job where everything in that job is something you learned in university, it's going to be pretty deadly boring, right? So go for it.
Great. Anyone else have an opinion on this? So if you were to receive an application from someone who doesn't tick all the boxes, you know, how have you handled that in the past, and why? Iria?
Yeah, I mean, if you write a job description, usually there's somewhat of a wish list, right? You have something in mind. Some things may be absolutely necessary. You need some sort of base level to be able to jump into the role. Some things could be interchangeable. Again, it's about making the case for yourself and making sure that comes across in your initial application materials to be able to catch someone's interest, so that you can then be able to speak to them in person, because, you know, you're going to get somebody taking a few minutes look quickly at your application materials. How are they going to become interested in what you have to bring to the table there?
And I think what Eric said also, you know, the number of times you see exactly the same format of a CV or a resume, and if the information is the same, is that like that old saying, you know, if everyone's special, then no one's special. So make it stand out. It's like when we see grants that always start off with their disease is the most important thing in the world. It becomes noise. For me, it's setting yourself up to be different, which shows that sort of different capacity to think, but you also have, you know, that element of curiosity to be different. So curiosity will get you in an interview with me any day of the week, as well as that passion. So, you know, be different, be bold, and make yourself stand out.
So on that note, in terms of, you know, making themselves stand out, when you think about the benefits of hiring a biomedical engineer versus, you know, an electrical engineer, mechanical, computer engineer student, and even, you know, in the biological sciences, what about a biology student? What is it about biomedical engineers that makes them stand out, and how can students market themselves that way when applying for jobs?
I'll go first because I have a very specific opinion there. I'm on several advisory councils for various universities in their biomedical engineering programs. Make sure your engineering is solid, and then learn the biology. You want to be a good biomedical engineer, be an engineer who understands biology deeply, but make sure you do your engineering courses, because a biologist can also do some engineering, but it won't necessarily be what I'm looking for, and it won't be as fast, and it won't be as deep, and they won't have the math right. So make sure you're an engineer who understands biology. Okay, otherwise you're just competing with a bunch of engineer wannabes. Use that in a nice term. Everyone wants to be an engineer, but you have to have your fundamentals, and then make biology your hobby. Read biology textbooks, understand cell biology, understand human mechanics, make it what you sort of read about. There's so much information out there. Go onto YouTube, blah, blah, blah. But be an engineer first who knows biology. My humble opinion.
I can maybe jump to just because I work with people from a number of different disciplines. You know, I think on my direct team, I'm one of the few people that come from an engineering background. In my perspective, it is easier to learn the biology once you have the engineering. Maybe that's just my perspective that, you know, it's a different style of learning. It requires a lot of ability to read critically, think critically, and jump into new fields. But once you have that fundamental engineering training, I think that trains you to solve and think about really hard problems. And that's what can build a foundation for a great career in biomedical engineering. So looking at the problem solving, the analytical capabilities, that's where I would highlight as strengths that could come out of an engineering training.
And just to build on that very simply, for me, biomedical engineers have an interest in biology or healthcare. So, I mean, you've got that analytical capacity of the engineer fused with the interest in trying to solve a medical or a biomedical problem. I think that provides that extra bit of, not relevance is too strong a word, but area of applicability. Electrical engineers absolutely still relevant because of their capacity for what they do. It's the applicability to a biomedical or a medical question, I think, that sets them apart.
Great. Daryl, on that note, there's an interesting question for you. Do you have any advice on getting involved in a hospital, for example, in a volunteer position? It seems that it's difficult to get involved currently due to the strict regulations, as well as even without the pandemic. So thinking back, you know, how can students, even once the, you know, our situation has bettered in some way, how can students get involved in the hospital?
Well, again, I guess it depends on what they want to get involved with. I mean, volunteering is difficult just simply because of insurance reasons and other reasons. If they're interested in research, then if they're interested in a specific type of research, then as I said, I can put them in contact with anybody. If they're just trying to understand and get an appreciation of the hospital and the medical research environment that's composed of it, then the simplest way is co-op programs. I know it adds 8 months to your time as a student, but coming from somewhere that didn't have this program, the co-op program and then the MyTax program are unbelievably beneficial to undergraduate students. If you can say you've done co-ops and you've tried different things and you know this is where you want to go, that's a major magnet for me. At the moment, as you said, it's difficult with COVID to do anything in person, although our labs now have reopened to some degree. I think we're at 65% capacity at the moment. That's not likely to change in the near future given this resurgence. So it will be far more difficult in the next sort of 3 to 6 months. But I think once we open up again, my simple advice would be, first of all, get in contact with me or somebody that you know who's interested in research, and we'll set you up with somebody. But take the opportunity, if you in any way can, to do a co-op as an undergraduate.
Great. Okay, and thinking about applications for internships or employment, we touched a little bit about, you know, what makes an application really strong. But if you'd like to share maybe one example of an application that really stood out for you, what made it so outstanding in your opinion?
Well, for me, it was that student I was telling you about who did a co-op in fisheries, wildlife, cancer, and then came to my lab. And she just wrote that. She said, listen, I don't know what I want to do. I know that I'm very interested in research, but I'm not sure. And so she said, I know now that I'm not interested in salmon hatcheries. I'm not interested in pine beetles. Cancer was interesting. And, you know, she attended some lectures I gave in undergraduate. She said, can I try your lab? And it was a very simple email. I said, well, this, absolutely. And she turned out to be one of my best PhD students. And ironically, now she is a graduate student advisor in Alberta. So she's not stayed in research, but she produced a magnificent PhD with 6 or 7 papers. And then she said, well, actually, you know, I've done a postdoc now and I want to do this. So for me, it's just a simple articulation to show that you really are interested. We've all been burnt by students who come in saying, I want to do this, but really they don't want to do it. They're just doing it to either, you know, make up time or trying to get into medical school or trying to do something else. And you can tell they're not, their heart's not in it. And after enough time, the supervisor's heart's not in it as well. And then it's just a disaster. So really coming with that enthusiasm and curiosity for me is the number one. And she sent just a very simple email, just articulating that.
Interesting. So being genuine is very important.
Genuine and just, yeah, short and simple.
Great. Any other thoughts? Any other examples of, you know, a really great application you've seen in the past?
Well, I'll jump in with one of my all-time favorites. I was advertising some years ago for somebody who was going to help on our graphical user interface design team back when that was still a big thing. And had an applicant who sent me a resume which featured a picture of a wrench tightening a nut at the top of the page. And underneath it, she said, when you're tightening a nut, you shouldn't have to think about the wrench. And that so beautifully encapsulated how GUI should be designed that she got the interview. And she got the job as well, by the way. But it was just so unique and so creative and really hit the point that I've never forgotten that.
Interesting. Yeah, so a lot of times students, you know, it's, I think Daryl was the one who mentioned this before, or Eric, you know, students sit in these workshops on how to build their resumes and cover letters. And what I'm hearing a lot is, you know, don't worry about staying within that box, right? Don't be afraid to be creative and to show your true self through these applications, because that's what will make you really stand out, is showing what are you passionate about, your curiosity, your creativity, let those shine through in the application.
But what you also see now, a lot of companies use AI to scan resumes before it actually gets to a person. And you know, if you can't write the keywords that are required, it doesn't even make it to a person looking. So you know, you've got to be able to capture nuances that will set you apart.
Right. Great. Okay. So once a student is successful in securing a co-op position, do you have any advice on how to make the most out of the time spent in a co-op position in any company? So, you know, what should students be doing beyond their responsibilities that are assigned to them?
You just nailed it. Beyond their responsibilities. You show me that you're able to think and contribute intellectually to my group and move the bar in thinking, I will likely convert you to a full-time position. If you come in and work your 8 hours and do exactly what I ask you to do, I probably won't offer you a full-time position. If you challenge me with some questions that make me think, that aren't trivial, you know, why is the sky blue questions, but some depth, I will probably convert your position to a full-time position. So you can see I'm really focusing on creativity, intellectual contribution, understanding. Everyone can work hard, but working in a way that is creative and coming up with solutions that other people wouldn't necessarily jump to right away, I'm looking for that. And that will convert your co-op position to a full-time position.
I'd just like to say, in terms of, you know, not necessarily just continue to work at that company, but looking in the field later, talk to other people. You're going to get to know so many people working at the company that have different roles, have different experience, different backgrounds. Make the most of that time and build those connections that occur naturally, because that's the best way to network, is to have natural connections as well as your work, and say yes to the opportunities and new things that come along, right? You can use it to go in completely different directions. For me, that's what got me into IP, is just saying yes to learning about this project, realizing that's where I could apply my knowledge, that's where I could work on something and have a focus. So it can change your career path if you take that opportunity and make the most of it.
And so really take that opportunity to learn and explore as much as you can, and definitely look beyond your main responsibilities.
Definitely.
Great. All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to go back to talking about the industry as a whole. So which sector within the biotech industry do you think has the most potential for very large growth?
Vaccine development.
Vaccine and AI, machine learning.
Great.
Yeah, I would say the whole area of digital health, which incorporates AI and machine learning, is going to completely change the way we deliver healthcare over the next 10 years.
And then as a field, I think aging and regenerative medicine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Focused cell therapy is going to become very, very important. There are a number of clinical trials that stem cell is participating in, whether it's T cells or beta cells for insulin or cardiomyocytes. There are some pretty good opportunities coming up for successful cell therapy. The challenge will be the cost. Someone has to figure out how we can compensate the cell therapy business model. The science is good, the technology looks pretty good, but each therapy is going to cost $1 million. And so we're going to have to figure out how we're going to move that forward. That's going to, so cell therapy is going to be amazing. I think technologically we're going to get some major progress, but we won't be able to afford it.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And also accessibility of those therapies. How can you get them to the most patients?
Yeah.
Great.
Right, CAR T right now is amazing. It'll cure cancer, but it's going to cost you a couple $1 million.
Right.
But it's going to cure cancer.
All right, so a couple of last questions. Firstly, how would you advise people to get their foot in the door in biotech for those students who did their co-ops at non-biotech companies? So how can they sort of spin their experiences to be attractive to your organizations?
We have lots of openings. Apply. We're looking for good people. Make sure your reference letters sing. If you weren't positions that weren't relevant to biotech, the reference letters that I request from those people should still talk about your intelligence, your creativity. Speak to your referees. Make sure that those letters are tuned to the type of position that you're looking for. Because I have a lot of applications and very little information to go on. And so it's very competitive out there. I mean, number one, understand your competition, right? There are now biomedical engineering programs at UVic, UBC, SFU, Calgary, McMaster, Queens, Waterloo, Toronto, McGill. Every department is releasing, 30 students a year? Do the math. It's competitive. There's lots of opportunities, but you got to stand out. And that standing out comes from hard work and creative application of the things you learn.
And again, to take it in a slightly different direction, get involved in student projects and putting on conferences, maybe, making that extra effort. If your co-op positions are not related to biomedical engineering, but you've gotten involved with one of the biomedical engineering student teams and worked on the medical device, that speaks a lot. Get involved in some of these student competitions, like the one the Medical Device Development Center runs every year, where you put your project forward to get it judged by an independent panel. That's a great thing to have on your resume, even if you didn't win first prize. if you got a project in for consideration, that's fantastic. That shows the extra effort, creativity, and drive that we're looking for.
I would also say, for me, with the benefit of hindsight, because I certainly didn't do this as a student, have some idea about what you want to do for the next 3 to 4 years. At least try. I mean, casting a wide net and just sending up a blasted resume saying, give me a chance, is not going to work as well these days as perhaps it once did. But knowing what you want to do is part of the question, and the benefit of being a student in such a broad field as biomedical engineering gives you that opportunity to actually put out feelers and try and understand what really motivates you and why did you get in the field in the first place, because that will also dictate on where you put your applications in and drive the people that you want to speak to.
Yeah, I kind of following on with that is learning about different types of positions and different types of companies, across Canada. I think there's so many different fields that you can specialize in. There's so many different roles that you could end up filling, and the more information you have about those, the better you're able to gauge where your capabilities and where your interests can lie and where you can be a good fit, and that will make you be able to present yourself as a better candidate. There's lots of different types of information online, networking events, where you can learn about different companies and what they do. It's not just big companies. There's so many small companies coming up in the biomedical industry, and you need to be aware of them to be able to see where positions could be and where you could fit. So learn as much as you can there.
Great. Okay, so we have about 4 minutes left. So I have one last question for you. And the first thing that comes to your mind, what is one thing about your jobs that you are most enthusiastic about?
Mine's easy. It's not a job. I love going to work every day. Every day is different. I work with really smart people doing really important work at a company that's wonderful to work for, with a boss I respect, with appropriate remuneration. It's not a job. So if you're very, very fortunate and you get into what you want, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle, and I'm extremely happy with it.
Great answer, Eric. Thank you. Iria?
One word though, Eric.
For me, I mean, it's the opportunity to learn something new and to talk to people making amazing discoveries that are happening all the time, every day in the field. So that's what's most exciting about it.
Yeah, and Eric and Iria said it beautifully. I think for me also, it's particularly for right now, it's the future. Being part of this new hospital and research building, and being able to set the scene for world-changing research and clinical care, I think for me is just motivating beyond belief. Despite all the roadblocks and crap that COVID has thrown in front of us, it's actually been a great enabler in a lot of ways, and it's brought together biotech and industry and academia, I should say, together in ways we wouldn't have thought about 5 years ago. So for me, it's partnerships, motivation in the future.
And for me, it comes back to what I mentioned before. Every day we can, look in the mirror and say, I actually did something to improve people's lives today. I had a positive impact on people who otherwise would be suffering or facing challenges that we can help address. That's what drives me.
Right. So what I'm hearing a lot is, find what you're passionate about, and then that will lead you to your purpose, right? And as students, just starting their careers, there's often a lot of pressure to find that perfect job and to find your purpose and where you're meant to be and what will bring you the most excitement right away, right after graduation. But a lot of times that's not necessarily the case, and that's fine. And I think that, Iria touched on this a little bit earlier, which is take the time to explore and to learn about different things and be open-minded when you're in your co-op position or when you're exploring career opportunities. Don't necessarily, put yourself under a great amount of pressure to find that perfect position right away. All right. Well, with that, I'd really like to thank all of the panelists. It was great to meet. Yes, Eric, go ahead.
I just want to leave people with one thing and follow up from what Daryl said, because this is the best advice I ever got. And I routinely get people saying this is the best advice I gave them. Get a 10-year plan. Where do you want to be in 10 years? And then work backwards. If you do that, it'll be very, very clear what to do tomorrow. If you think about what to do tomorrow without a 10-year plan, it looks random. Okay, so where do you want to be in 10 years? And then work backwards, because it takes about 10 years to do something important. Okay, so think in a 10-year chunk, work backwards in time, and then what you have to do tomorrow will be obvious.
Great advice. Any last words of advice before we close off? All right. Well, thank you all so much. It was really a pleasure to have you here, and I'm sure all of the attendees